Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of I've Been Playing. Today we were talking about Mortal Shell, specifically Mortal Shell Enhanced Edition. I feel as though it's a disservice to call Mortal Shell yet another Dark Souls clone, but to many extents, it is. The HUD, the aesthetic of the world, even the loading screens are reminiscent of Dark Souls specifically, but the Soulsborne genre as a whole, as is the extremely esoteric and hard-to-find lore. Despite all that, though, as I said, it's a bit of a disservice to Mortal Shell to call it just a Souls-like, because it does enough things differently that it does feel different if you are familiar with Dark Souls games and FromSoft. The first would be the idea of the shell. You are a foundling. You are called a foundling. And the idea is that you inhabit other bodies that you find around the world. Now, basically, functionally, this is like there are 4 different bodies around the world, and each one lines up more or less with a specific class, and some are more beginner-friendly than others. This also gives you a chance to re-inhabit your shell if you die. So, functionally, this is similar to Sekiro. I hate to keep comparing it to FromSoft games, but it's inevitable with the way this game looks, and mostly the way it functions. Basically, what happens when you die once and you get knocked out of the shell, the body you're inhabiting at that time, and then you have a few seconds to try to get back into the body before you get attacked by the enemies, again, in your foundling form, because you have basically no health in that, so basically, you know, one hit, you're dead kind of a thing. And if you can get back in, then you have a second chance. That's one key way that it's different from at least most of the FromSoft games. Another way it's different is that the combat is actually quite a bit different. It feels a lot different. It's gonna be kind of hard to get into for people who maybe play Dark Souls quite a lot, because it's not quite the same rhythm, it doesn't have quite the same flow, because one important thing about this game is that first of all, you can't parry until you get a special item, and there's this tower in the area where you start, which is Fulgrim. It's kind of the intro tutorial, almost hub area. I guess it's a hub area, because the other areas you need to go to find the bosses to defeat to win the game are in separate sections off this kind of central hub, almost wheel. But there's a tower in this area, and you go there and there's a giant there, and once you release the giant, then you can parry because he gives you a special item. The thing is that you have little slivers of resolve above your health bar. Parrying takes resolve, so to do a riposte and all that, you need to have at least one of those sections. You also use those sections for special weapon upgrades that you can find around the world. So the first one you're probably going to find is behind a mini-boss called Grisha. You can grab that without killing him, and it actually helps that fight quite a bit. I mean, I didn't use it that much in that fight, but it does take a huge chunk of his health off if you can build up the resolve during that fight to use it. But one of the main differences, one of the main reasons this feels so different is because to block, you basically turn into a statue. It's called hardening. So you harden, and it blocks the first attack, and then you keep doing whatever you were doing before you harden. So you can use that just to block in general. You can use that to attack and then kind of pause your attack mid-attack, and then the other thing, the enemy attacks you, and then you keep swinging and you hit it, which is kind of primarily the way I've been using it against the stronger enemies, at least. You also, when you roll away, you harden as well, so not completely obviously, but there's a little bit of, not exactly invincibility, but a little bit of leeway with dodging as well. Obviously, there's still the keeping track of your stamina and stuff, and you can't just constantly block and harden. It has a bit of a recharge time, so it's not a very long recharge time, but you can't expect to be doing it every half a second. It just won't work. And frankly, it would not be in the spirit of the game because it would make it probably much easier. So admittedly, it does take a little bit of getting used to the combat before you get into this. I was having a heck of a time, I've got to admit. It took me a little while. I finally got to the point where I was attacking, freezing, getting hit, attacking. I eventually got there. I eventually felt like I could get there, and I have now beaten a couple of things. I first of all beat Grisha, eventually, thankfully. And I've also beaten one of the iterations of the apparition, I guess, that gives you new weapons. And since I've moved on to weapons, the same thing I said about the shells, how they're kind of different classes, you also have, I think, 4 different weapons as well. So you start out, no matter what, with a massive sword, which is good but slow, as massive swords tend to be, but you can find statues around the world where if you interact, there's a book near the statue, if you interact with that, you get warped into kind of what functioned as the tutorial area initially, and you have to fight the same person but with the weapons that you can then win. So I have won a hammer and chisel, which is much faster, which is much more like how I play the game personally. I don't like big, slow swords. I don't care if their damage output is high. The fact that they're so slow stresses me out. I can't use them, so I'm glad that I got something a little faster. It did take another little bit of getting used to, because I've been using the sword for several hours already at that point, because I was mainly running around Fogrim trying to collect stuff, and so I got used to the sword. But I didn't really like the sword. Another thing that's a little bit different, just while we're kind of on things you can interact with in the world, usable items have to be used a certain number of times for you to fully understand what they are. So the first time, generally the first time you use them, you learn what they do. And then you have to use most of them at least 10 times, you become more familiar with them. Once you become more familiar with them, they tend to have a larger benefit or a larger negative effect if they're an item that gives you a negative effect. So that's a little different as well. You also directly learn from the text after you use it the first time what the heck the thing does, which is, I feel like, is not something that Dark Souls and Soulsborne games tend to do. They tend to leave it fairly ambiguous. Some of them are obvious to figure out, but a lot of them remain ambiguous, and that doesn't really seem to be the case here. Most of them, after you use them once, you understand what they do. Other than that, though, it's going to feel very familiar to someone who has ever played one of these types of games. Your enemy drops, I guess, if you want to call them that, are tar, so that's the stuff that you can use as currency as well to level up. There are also things called glimpses, which you need to help level up skills, and your skills are specific to which shell you're inhabiting at any one time. So the tar disappears when you die, or it's left at the spot where you die when you die, and glimpses you keep the whole time, but they are tied to your specific shell, I learned, because I thought I had a couple, and then I inhabited a new shell, and then they were gone, and I didn't realize why, and then I switched back and they were still there. So they remain with you, but they are attached to the shell that you are currently in. So it's important to know that, especially for the collectible versions of these things, because you're gonna find one shell that you like more than others, probably just the balance of health, stamina, and resolve is gonna work for you. So you're going to want to save any items that you get that are related to glimpses for that specific shell. Also, overall, I think it's fun. I've heard it's not very long, it's not as expansive as Soulsborne tend to be, because it's not as big a budget kind of a thing. The way the game seems to be doing things, I'm guessing there are 4 bosses I need to defeat, because everything else seems to come in 4. The shells come in 4, the weapons, there are 4 of them, so I'm guessing there are 4 different areas. I found one area. I don't really know where I need to go in that area. I've wandered around quite a bit. I've managed to upgrade the hammer and chisel. You have special weapon upgrades, I think I said this, but I've managed to get one for the hammer and chisel, so now I have a cool move to do. But I'm not quite sure where I'm going with that area. There are a bunch of levers, and I've pulled a couple of them, and I'm assuming that has something to do with opening the door that seems to be in my way, but I don't know for sure. I would say that this one is probably a little bit harder to get into, just because the combat feels different. It feels different enough, and is maybe not as beginner-friendly as even Dark Souls is. But once I got into it, once I finally felt like I understood how the combat worked, I'm having a lot of fun with it. Other than, not really knowing where I'm going right now, I kind of need to explore a little bit more, because I've only found that one kind of boss area, and I don't know where the others are. I haven't really explored the main area, Fogrim, very much since those first few initial hours when I was trying to figure out how the heck to do anything. So I need to go back there and kind of figure out where the other paths branch off and where to go. One thing you can do to kind of learn where you need to go is there are special stones that will give you visions to show, where some things are, or if you find the main tower in Fogrim, you can look at the different shells and it'll kind of give you an area where that shell is, so you can kind of go look for it. So there's a little bit of guidance, but in terms of the areas I need to go to actually defeat bosses, I'm assuming, I don't know how to get there or where they are or whatever, and they're poison frogs and just enemies, and then that's just how it is. It's not very straightforward. It can be quite confusing, actually, so if you get lost really easily in the opening area, it can be that's another way it can be hard to get into, because you'll be like, well, what the heck? Where am I going? I'm lost constantly, which I get. It is a bit confusing. But I think it's pretty fun, and it looks good. It just came out last year, but I am playing the Enhanced Edition, which I think the idea behind the Enhanced Edition is not only fixing some things that I'm sure probably were a little bit buggy, but probably upgrading it for the newer consoles as well, because I think it came out summer last year, or just not when the new consoles were out yet. And now they've kind of upgraded it, streamlined some things, and can it even count as remastered if it's a year old? They remade it for the new ones a bit. But those are just my impressions of the game. What do you think about it? Have you played it? Are you a Souls-like person or not? And anything you want to say about the game in the comments down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this. Consider subscribing if you're not already subscribed. I do one of these every Monday, and I do a whole bunch of other stuff on my channel that you can check out. I'll see you next time.